Good afternoon, all. Welcome to this talk. I'll be speaking about sustainable agriculture in the 21st century, perspectives from developing countries. My name is Marco Tieno from the Department of Water and Agricultural Resource Management of the University of Embu. So my talk will be structured as follows. I'll give a brief chronology of sustainable agriculture and then talk about the components of sustainable agricultural practices in the 21st century. And then I'll give some case studies from Southeast Asia and Latin America that are very comparable to our systems in Africa. And of course, discuss some opportunities for sustainable agriculture in Africa, and end by looking at future directions in sustainable agriculture in Africa. So first, let's look at a bit of history about sustainable agriculture. But before we do that, let's define what sustainable agriculture is. So this is basically the use of environmentally friendly farming practices in crops or livestock production without harming the natural ecosystems or humans. And the origin of sustainable agriculture can be traced back to the Green Revolution of the 1950s and 1960s. Of course, as you know, this is the period after the Second World War, and of course, after a Great Depression in terms of food production. So many countries in the world, especially in the developing countries, adopted extensive and very intensive agriculture in terms of production of cereals, mostly rice and wheat. And these had very negative impacts on the environment. So Western countries realized that if nothing is done, these kind of activities are going to exacerbate the natural balance in the ecosystem. And in future, therefore, there will be problems with sustainability. And of course, some of the problems we're seeing today related to climate change can be traced back to this particular period of the Green Revolution. Some of the damage is almost irreparable, but of course, because of sustainable agriculture movement, most of these things are being addressed. So in this talk, really, we're going to be looking at some of the components of sustainable agriculture that are aimed at stabilizing the system and of course, assuring future generations that there will still be some part of the environment that will support them at that time. So the movement continued until 1960s when organic farming also became very fashionable, especially in the global north. And people wanted to really eat healthy food that do not have a lot of chemicals in them. So combined with organic farming, sustainable agriculture became now the norm and a vocabulary in the world. And today, of course, organic farming is one of the strategies that is used in sustainable agriculture. And because it adopts ecologically based pest control and also the use of biologically produced fertilizers, mostly from animal and plant material. So in the 21st century, there's a lot that has happened in terms of advancing the science of sustainable agriculture. And in the next slide now, what we would like to look at are some of the components of sustainable agricultural practices. And of course, there are 7, but these are the major ones. There are a few more that we can always look at. So here, I'm going to be looking at sustainable or ecological intensification. The second is water use efficiency and soil management, fertilizer use, and fertigation. And then we'll also look at energy use efficiency and the use of certified seeds and pest, weed, and disease management. And then we look at post-harvest handling technologies. So let's look at these ones one by one, beginning with ecological intensification or sustainable intensification. So basically this practice adopts agricultural strategies that boost production while improving environmental outcomes. So simple things like selecting the right fertilizer for one's crop, or even using the right pesticide for the right pest, not necessarily the broad spectrum insecticides, for example, but targeting a specific pest with a specific product. That really helps. It's part of ecological intensification, and as opposed to agricultural intensification, which is the opposite of the same. So the desired outcome of a piece of land are of course achieved without the need for cultivating more land or destroying the natural habitat. And the main advantage of ecological intensification is upgraded agricultural production system with no net environmental cost. So this is very important because again, the environmental cost will be degradation of land, for example, or pollution or related things that disturb the balance in the ecosystem. So to ensure food security in a continent with rising human populations and declining arable land, ecological intensification is needed like yesterday. So the next one I'll look at is water use efficiency. And of course, using water efficiently is essential, especially with the current realities of climate change. And water use can be improved by various means, including researching on drought-resistant crops. For example, genetically modified rice that is quite drought tolerant, and therefore it does not really need a lot of water for irrigation. As we know, rice is one of those crops that will not really do if it does not have water. So the other thing that could be done is monitoring plant transpiration and only providing water when the plant requires that particular water. So because most farmers always adopt regime of irrigation, regardless of the data from plant transpiration, and this of course leads to wastage of water because the irrigation is done at a time when the plant does not really require that particular water. And of course, there is a reducing of soil evaporation through various techniques. Of course, you can always use mulching, for example. There is this photo here, which has plastic mulch that is used. But for most farmers who cannot afford this, especially in the African continent and the global South countries, then there's always other materials that are used for mulching. For example, there's straw from grass, for example, or stover. These are materials that are used after harvesting the crop. Then the remains, the residue that remains can always be used as mulching material. Now, it's also important to investigate other alternative means of water sources, and this would include desalination of water. This is basically removing salt from saline water, for example, ocean water. These are technologies that are well advanced in other countries, for example, in Israel, where they're able to remove salt from the Mediterranean Sea and use that water not only for domestic use, but also for irrigation. The other one is exploitation of brackish water, which is found at the confluence between a river and an ocean or a sea. So that water that is slightly salty, but is not as salty as the seawater, can also be used for irrigation purposes. And of course, the other one is use of marginal water or use of reclaimed water from sewage. This is something that has a huge potential, especially here in Africa, but it has not been used quite as well. Of course, there are technologies now of recycling water, and in fact, countries like Israel, again, have almost 70% of the water they use for irrigation that is basically from marginal sources. And of course, there's also a huge potential using groundwater sources. This is something that is still being explored here in Kenya, but we have many farmers that are using groundwater to meet their water needs of the crops. So the other thing I'll look at now is soil management, fertilizer use, and fertigation. And here, soil nutrients can greatly be improved by the use of amendments such as compost, for example. And of course, simple practices such as no tillage before planting or leaving plant residue after harvesting reduces soil water evaporation and safeguards against soil erosion. So these are important steps, but are extremely simple to adopt and implement in the farm. So again, although fertilizers may have very severe effects in the environment, their use is often inevitable. And in this case, it is encouraged to use highly soluble fertilizer products such as potassium nitrate, which can be used in a wide range of crops. And of course, potassium nitrate can be delivered to crops via fertigation systems or even foliar application. So if you look at this diagram below here, is basically a fertigation system which combines the irrigation system and fertilizer application system. So you kind of draw your water from the reservoir or a lake or a pool, and you pass it through a system where the correct amount of fertilizer is injected into the system and is transported via pipes and delivered to the in the right amount and in the right dosage to the plants. All this now can be computerized, so you don't have to do anything, just calibrate your system and you let it run as it should. Now, the next component, which is very important, is of course energy use efficiency. And here, energy is of course very expensive, and the fluctuating costs have caused economic challenges for many farmers. And of course, reliance on fossil fuel is not just unsustainable, but is one of the major contributors to climate change, even as the COP26 meeting concluded in Glasgow in Scotland recently. This is one of the things that was highlighted. And of course, the target now for 2030 is to have up to 1.5 degrees rise in global temperatures to avoid or avert global disasters happening because of climate change due to increased temperatures. So in the context of our talk today, therefore, the aim is to seek for alternative energy sources to improve energy independence and also revenues. And of course, one of the solutions is to tap into renewable energy sources. And this would include things like solar panels or solar panels that you put out in the farm to supplement your energy source, or actually to be the main energy source. We are lucky in Kenya, for example, because 88% of this country is actually arid land. So if we take advantage of the sun that is out there, really, and have the solar panels put in farms, then this can really sort us out in terms of the energy needs of the same. The other one, of course, is the use of wind power in terms of driving these windmills to generate the energy that we might use. And of course, there's also a possibility of using sustainably produced biofuel. This is something that has a huge potential, especially here in Africa and in Kenya particularly, but it has not really been taken very seriously, because we know there's canola now. Canola is oilseed rape, which is grown in most parts of Mount Kenya region. But what happens is that this is very much controlled. It's only 2 companies that grow this crop in Kenya. I don't know why others are not allowed to do that, but we found out it's only 2 companies that grow that, and is usually for export. They use the canola oil for additives in livestock feed and whatnot. So those are things to think about. The other one is use of certified seeds. And here we need to note that farmers, especially in Africa, struggle with poor quality seeds that do not meet their requirements. And what are the requirements of the farmers? The requirements of the farmers is to have crop qualities, for example, long shelf life. There's also durability under storage, and there's high yield, resistance to disease, healthy food, drought resistance, and adaptation to a variety of climatic conditions. So getting the right varieties of seeds require continuous research and development. And this is an area that we can really take advantage of as universities and also as research institutions in this continent and also in this country, so that we match the present customer needs to the production climates in different regions. So moving forward, I think this is one of the quick opportunities that we can grab in terms of developing seeds, and of course would help the farmers to achieve the qualities that they desire in their particular crops. The other one is pest, weed, and disease management. And here we note that plant protection is of central importance to farmers. And of course, the goal of sustainable agriculture here is to control pests using environmentally friendly tactics. And a widely used approach is the integrated pest management, or IPM, which emphasizes on reducing pesticide use and embracing pest control technologies that do not harm the environment or humans, but maintains the crop yields and quality as well. So the current situation is that domestic and export markets look very favorably at crops that have been produced using IPM principles. And the approach advocates for spraying only when necessary, and of course promoting biological control. So if you can look at these diagrams here, or these photos, of course this shows predation going on, which is part of the biological control, where if you have enough of these predators, the ladybird beetle here, for example, consuming these aphids, and that really has been shown to be a very effective way of controlling pests without really needing to apply chemicals in your field. There's also parasitoids, which are small wasps normally, but also there are flies that lay their eggs on the pest larvae. And when the eggs hatch, then the larvae dig into this pest and of course consume it and until it's dead. So if you maintain a habitat that promotes this kind of beneficial insects or organisms, then they will naturally put or control or suppress the population of pests. Therefore, you'll be saving money, because then you will not be using chemicals in your farm. Now, the last component we look at, of course, is post-harvest handling technologies. And here, we need to note that efficient post-harvest technologies are required for the supply of fresh produce with excellent appearance and free of decay to the market using environmentally friendly approaches. And the goal of sustainable post-harvest handling is to increase food safety and quality in the local markets and to enable exports of produce that meet the highest standards. So modern sustainable ways of doing this, of course, includes adapting advanced scientific tools, for example, in physiology, in chemistry as well, and in pathology, and in microbiology, entomology, molecular biology, to also looking at taste and aroma of these particular crops. So again, research and development is very much required here to develop an environmentally friendly post-harvest handling for specific crops. So then let's next look at the case studies from developing countries that are comparable to those countries in Africa. And one of those regions is the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. And here the region has adopted a transformative approach to change their situation, which is was suffering a lot from intensified agriculture, and become reliable and self-reliant. And what they did was to invest in small farms. So governments and the international organizations invested in small farms to encourage practices that do not damage the environment. And of course, what they saw is sustainability in what they were, the crops they're producing mainly is rice that they produce in Vietnam. There's also preservation and restoration of biodiversity and provision of ecosystem services, including carbon sequestration. And of course, the other intervention was capacity building for green agriculture. And the region has also invested in building the capacity of local farmers in green agriculture, with gains in climate impacts mitigation, and of course, prevention of further degradation and reduction in the number of hungry families. So this kind of just shows you what goes on in Vietnam agricultural landscapes. Is quite intensive because of this delta is kind of serving most of the Asian countries in this particular belt. And of course, just to an interesting fact to note, they always have these floating markets on the Mekong Channel or Mekong River. All this food, most of it is produced sustainably. So this really does not leave a lot of footprint in the environment, and this encourages more people to come out and practice this kind of activities that, of course, preserve our environment. The other example is from Latin America. And of course, the Food and Agricultural Organization report of 2021, June this year, indicates successes in Latin America and Caribbean as follows. So I'll pick two countries. Country of Ecuador, there's a project on smart livestock project, or climate smart livestock project, that allowed small-scale farmers to increase their milk production, augment their income by about 40%, and improve the quality of soils, and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. So this avoided addition of 24,000 tons of greenhouse gases to the environment. The other example is Uruguay, and here a project of good practices and alternatives to the use of pesticides that worked with more than 2,000 technicians and producers showed a possibility of reducing the use of herbicides by up to 70% in soy production cycles. This is without affecting the yield and without increasing costs. So this is really good because then it translated into an average savings of about $40 per hectare. And, now we can look at opportunities for sustainable agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, there are very many opportunities given the talk and given what we've just had now. But of course, the one that stands out quite a lot, because this is a crop that has almost evolved with the African families, is pulse crop agriculture. And pulses are basically legumes. These are grain legumes, which are referred to as pulses. And as we know, legumes play an important role in agriculture because of their ability to biologically fix atmospheric nitrogen and enhance the biological turnover of phosphorus. So in other words, if legumes are going to, or when legumes are fixing nitrogen, what they require is usually phosphorus to do that. It's quite an important role, as I was saying, in agriculture because of the ability to biologically fix atmospheric nitrogen and enhance the biological turnover of phosphorus. And as I was saying, legumes require nitrogen, they require phosphorus to be able to break down nitrogen, which means if you have a lot of phosphorus in the soil, it's going to be broken down to produce more nitrogen, and that's a good thing because then the soils will not be polluted with phosphorus. which of course we know is one of the main pollutants of soils. So these legumes can become the cornerstone of sustainable agriculture in Africa. And of course, legume species that provide the most critical environmental services, including soil erosion control and soil nutrient enrichment, should be considered in sustainable agriculture programs. The other one is organic farming in Africa, and Africa has the potential to benefit from organic agriculture for soil nutrient recapitalization. And organic farming builds soil fertility and structure through techniques such as composting, cover crops, mulching, and crop rotation. In a region, for example, called Tigray in Ethiopia, where there is now war going on, the crop yields of major cereals and pulses of 20,000 farmers almost doubled through the use of ecological agricultural practices. So then the future of sustainable agriculture in Africa as follows. Because we need to recognize the rapid urbanization and changing diets and growth in per capita income, these are really driving changes in the food systems. And such changes, of course, have boosted the growth of domestic and regional markets while opening big opportunities for small-scale producers. But at the same time, these particular opportunities bring challenges because the smallholder farmers are not able to meet the growing demand for urban populations. And as we know now, Africa has the highest migration from rural to urban areas. So there are very few farmers now left in the rural areas. Most people, majority of the population lives in urban areas. So to meet this demand is quite a challenge. And of course, there are a few things that can be done to address this. So one of those is appropriate policies implemented to support smallholder farmers in exploiting the new opportunities presented by the current environment. And these policies should really help in about four things. So one is to in the adoption of improved technologies for increased yields and reduced post-harvest losses. We know post-harvest losses is one of the big problems through especially food waste and food loss, be it in the farm or when you're transporting it from the farm to the store, or in the store awaiting for marketing. The other one is advancing digital technologies in transforming the African agricultural sector. These are huge potential in using digital technologies in smart farming, in precision agriculture. And this will really reduce a lot of wastes and also address the components that I talked about earlier. There's also aggregating farm data that can improve the financial inclusion of smallholder farmers. And of course, there's also the proliferation of smartphones among smallholder farmers that has made it easier to access a large pool of information at all levels of agricultural value chains. All this will contribute to agricultural sustainability. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much for your time. And I think we have a bit of time to ask and answer a few questions. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon.